everybody. This is Tom Shade, the Lively Tradition blog, and today we're having an interview with Alison Miller, who is another candidate for the Unitarian Universalist presidency, and she is the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Morristown, New Jersey, and has done many, many things in our association and in our ministry. So you probably all know her. But if you don't, this is a chance to get to know her. So Alison, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. I'm glad to be here with you.
Good, good. My first question is the question I asked Susan as well, and that's just, can you tell us about your young adult life, the college? Yeah, you said in your bio that you were thinking about becoming a doctor, and then decided against that. What you did in college, those changes, and then what you did in those post-college years until you decided that you were going to be a UU minister.
Sure. Well, college was a very exciting time for me, and in a different way than some other college students. I was recently declared in remission from a cancer where I was given a 3% chance of survival.
Oh my goodness.
So you can imagine how excited I was to enter my freshman year. And just to...
Where'd you go?
I went to Bryn Mawr, right outside of Philadelphia. And at first, I thought that I would pursue medicine. I really wanted to be engaged in the work of healing. And I had been so positively affected by doctors in my life that I had a desire to give back. I also had a passion to learn other languages and to learn about other cultures. So I was a French major and had the chance to live abroad in Alsace, and did become very, very fluent in that language, and took the pre-med classes, and was actively engaged, and in fact led the campus ministry group of Bryn Mawr and also Haverford, which was a neighboring college. When I graduated, I wanted to have an experience of working in a hospital outside of a cancer ward. And I had been very engaged in a congregation, All Souls in New York City, growing up, that had launched the first AIDS task force in the country and had made a palpable difference in the lives of people living with AIDS, not only in our congregation, but in the city and really all over the country. So I interviewed and wound up getting an internship at the Bellevue NYU hospital AIDS, HIV and AIDS program. And I was also a French translator for patients throughout Bellevue Hospital who spoke French. So primarily working with Haitian and patients coming from the Ivory Coast. It was an incredible internship opportunity, and really a chance to engage with urban ministry in the city, and it was eye-opening on many levels. I remember having the experience of being with a patient and telling that person that they were HIV negative, and having them be very upset, actually very angry. And it was 1996, and so it was not a happy diagnosis for most people to be HIV positive. But this person was really upset because they were hoping to gain access to some of the affordable housing resources. And I really gained a deep sense of how many people in our community were really struggling to make it. And it had a big impact. I helped coordinate.
To be clear, that was not a ministerial internship.
No, No, but it's funny. I look back, and in some ways, it felt like my first foray into community ministry and ministry working with immigrants, and also I helped coordinate the opening of a GYN clinic for homeless women. So it was, now looking back, it feels like it was a ministry of sorts. And in some sense, I think I learned through that internship that I was really drawn, although I loved studying the sciences, I was really drawn towards people, towards building a community, and towards seeing the ways that larger groups of people could create change in the city. At the same time, at the same time, I was volunteering at the Unitarian Church of All Souls in New York City, and following the internship, I was working on staff full time at All Souls. But interestingly enough,
now that's your home church, right?
That is where I was raised. Yes, absolutely, and where I also spent a number of my young adult years after college. Interestingly, it was my volunteer ministries that foreshadowed a call to the ordained ministry. I was invited to be the youth director. And when I looked around the city, I saw that Community Church and Fourth Universalist didn't have youth ministries at the time. So I agreed to lead the youth ministry as an advisor if we could invite the other groups to join us. And so we relaunched all three ministries in the city. And then I looked around coffee hour, and I realized that there were very few, if any, young adults my age. And I thought, what was the point of investing all of this time in the youth ministry if there was just a cliff following it? So I invited peers that I had grown up with in the congregation, and also did outreach in the city to the young adults that were visiting All Souls but bouncing off. And pretty soon, within a year and a half, I had 250 participants in that young adult ministry. So between the young adults and the youth, I was managing, hundreds of kind of young people in the church, but still thought I was going to be a doctor. It was my youth group that reflected back to me, actually, one Sunday morning, that they thought that I was going to be a minister and not a doctor. And I assured them I was studying so hard for the MCATs that I would be heading to medical school. And one of them said, I'll never forget, leaned back in the couch, right, and said, talk to me in 2 years. You're going to be a minister. And of course, I don't know if he's a psychologist today, but anyway, I am a minister.
At least you had the lean and the non-directive question thing down already. Well, that's great. I mean, we are, so many of us are actually called by the people we minister to into the ministry, right? Even though we're not in that role, they keep telling us, this is where we see you, so you should start thinking about it. Well, that's a great story. So then it was out of that you decided to, so how many years did you have between your graduation from college and your enrollment in divinity school?
Actually 4 years. So I had the opportunity to work in a hospital. I had the opportunity, I was the youth director and founded the young adult group. And I was so lucky. It's funny, I look back and I think about how many of my partners there that we really built this young adult group together are now ministers or UU leaders today all across the country, which is it was a powerful leadership pipeline, I would say. And then I worked on staff. I was worked on the administrative staff as well as the RE staff during those 4 years. And I was the assistant to the ministers and the director of development. And then started at Harvard Divinity School 4 years after graduating college.
When I read your bio, what comes through is that you're truly a child of the church. that you grew up in the church for the most part, that you were very active in it at every stage of your life, even during the stage where where a lot of people are not active, that young adult period. There's often a period where people are not active, even though they are, they return and are active UUs later. Was there ever a time when you weren't active as a UU in some way or another? Was there ever a time where you were really tempted not to be in this faith?
Well, the way that I would phrase that question is, were you ever disappointed by our faith? And the reason I say that is that, yes, I had been disappointed by the faith at times, or less by the faith and more by, systems in the faith that weren't supporting things I valued. But no, I really was engaged in the faith. And when there was nothing there for me, I was part of the collective of people that built things. I often say that I was among the people that were laying the bricks on the foundation of the bridge for others. And in college, when I was leading the campus ministry, I was struck by, as you say, many Unitarian Universalists take a break, but also many other young adults take a break from whatever their faith of origin is, or even if it was no faith, are curious. 80% of the people that came to that group were new to Unitarian Universalism. So I think having that experience in my late teens and early 20s of how many people were really hungering for what we had to offer allowed me to see our faith with fresh eyes, and really pushed me not to take it for granted, and gave me a sense when it wasn't there, or when things fell short, how could we work together to change it, to allow the faith to be there for more people. And you're right. I started working for the church every Sunday at the age of 15. So for the last 3 years of high school, was the Sunday morning RE assistant, essentially. So.
Wow. It's, sometimes people say the greatest reformers are actually the insiders who see it from the outside in any system. And that may be you. So,
may I say one thing quickly right there? Because it gets to some of that disappointment. I'll make it short, is that I'm excited about what's happening right now around the anti-racism work that's really popping it up in our association, not only in the world out there, but in the work we do inside of our congregations and UU institutions. And there was also this powerful movement when I was a young adult, where people were really pressing and leaning into the work of transformation inside our congregations and inside Unitarian Universalism, and making changes. And it was very exciting to be a part of. So yes, we were on the inside trying to create reform. Yeah.
Can you just date that period? What years were you that young adult?
So I graduated college in 1996.
Okay, so it was like in so we're really talking about the late 1996 to 2000, 2001, that period of time.
And also growing up in Metro New York, I think that really paying attention to issues of anti-racism and diversity were very close to home. I mean, it was very present for us. So
in 1996, who was mayor of New York then?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. I don't know. Was it
was that Giuliani by then?
No, was it? I was going to say, was it Dinkins? Dinkins, that's what I was going to say. So now we have to Google that. And
well, these are, I follow things like that. So, because I always think there's more connection between what's going on in the political environment and what's going on in our churches.
Yeah.
That we acknowledge, right? And
right.
You're looking at a city like New York City having its first African-American mayor. The questions of anti-racism were probably in the air, and in
Right.
the water in a way
Oh,
that.
no, it was Giuliani. Definitely. You're right.
Okay.
It was Giuliani.
You
Yes.
Googled that up, didn't you?
I did. I'm good with technology.
There you go. All right. Interesting. Interesting. My next, I was going to ask you about your interest in medicine, but you kind of explained that, and I was wondering whether you had a family, one of the strongest indicators of people going into medicine is people in medicine in their family. And so I was wondering.
Do.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Okay.
My mother was a nurse, actually.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yes,
Okay.
my mother was a nurse. So.
And then you also had this experience with cancer, so you were inside hospitals a lot.
I grew up around hospitals a lot, actually, as a child. So visiting my mom in the hospital at work and then spent really a significant portion of my junior and senior year in the hospital. The longest stretch was probably 40 days.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. That really kind of cuts into your social life, doesn't it?
It did, I confess. Chemo cuts into your social
life quite a bit.
Having no hair as a teenager cuts into your social life.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So, what do I have as another question here? I have them actually in order. And what would you say are the strengths and drawbacks? It is that you that you grew up in All Souls in New York, and you interned in All Souls in Tulsa, and now you serve in the Fellowship in Morristown. Three, the All Souls churches in East and West are some of our most successful churches, and Morristown looks like it's a very successful church for its size. What are the strengths and drawbacks of having that experience? And if you were the vice president of the, 50-member fellowship in Lonesome Prairie, Square State, how would you look at that? What would you say to that person about how your experience is going to help them if you were the UUA president?
Sure. Well, a couple of things, actually. So the congregation that I serve right now is a vibrant, mid-sized congregation, probably about 350 adults and 120 children and youth. But I also served a campus ministry, which was essentially running a church of young adults that were about a church of about 50 members, and not everyone shows up every Sunday and all that. And I've also worked at the association and been engaged in ministry with congregations across the association of all sizes. And because my family was so active growing up, as well as me being active as a young adult and into the ordained ministry, I have a lot of relationships and experience working with congregations of all sizes, and care deeply about. I often say that in some places in a village, you might have the most vibrant 70-member church, and you could be in a city and have a very large congregation of 800 members that's actually on the decline. So I think we have to look deeper at what creates life-changing, powerful ministries, and how can the Unitarian Universalist Association really nourish and support Unitarian Universalists in their spiritual lives and their hopes for the world of all sizes, really.
So what is it that you think is that vital key ingredients that make for a vital and transforming congregation?
So when I look at it, I really see that the most powerful ministries, this is where my call to medicine has just changed shape. I really see still that our work of shared ministry is about bringing healing to individual lives and in the world beyond. my congregation growing up was so powerfully with me during that illness, and actually through the death of my father, which happened a couple of years earlier, that I had a sense that whether I lived or died, that they were really a part of helping me heal, no matter how many days or years I had. And I see that the social justice work that we're engaged in together in the world, with partners in our respective communities, is really about the work of healing as well. And one of the most powerful examples for me of this shared ministry of healing that we're engaged in, when we're most spiritually alive and justice-centered, and is that AIDS task force I mentioned earlier. We really launched that first AIDS task force, and there were members throughout the community that were engaged on the medical side, doctors and researchers. There were people living with AIDS that were sharing their stories, and the minister was breaking silences. The activists were, and advocates were out there really pushing change in the city and the world beyond, in terms of really dealing with homophobia, dealing with fear. I mean, many of the things I hear today around Black Lives Matter and immigrant justice are reminiscent of that time. Deaths were being discounted, and there was a need to both grieve, to pastor, and also to create and empower change. So to me, that shared ministry, the artists, the activists, the ministers, the caregivers, that's still what we offer one another and can offer the world.
Would you say that experience was the nurturing soil out of which your present commitments around social justice were first took root? Is that where that starts from?
I would say so. It's where I first stood up in school. There was a lot of ignorance, and had where I really first dispelled myths, spoke out, was very much a part of this congregational team that was engaged. And that was one of the reasons that I pursued that possibility of an internship in the AIDS program, was because I now, as an adult, had the opportunity to contribute in a different way. And I also draw strength and power from it, because I think about how much has changed in the landscape around homophobia since I was growing up. And and there's still work to do, obviously, but we really were deeply engaged and made a difference. And so I see in that a connection to the work that we're engaged in to this day, continue to be engaged in.
I think that's very interesting and important, because in my own opinion is that there has to be a very strong sense of efficacy and hope and optimism and pride in our ability to change things in order to fuel a movement for change. That if a movement for change is based entirely on how awful things are and despair, and how they outwit us at every turn and manage to co-opt every effort into stasis, that it discourages people. So I think it's very important to keep. I mean, that's an interesting thing for the UUA president, who has this ability or this platform to speak to all of us and for all of us into that public square, and to put social movements into perspective.
And a personal journey too. I mean, I was at a place of despair to have lost my father one year, to have lost my grandfather the next year, to have been diagnosed with an incurable cancer the next year. It was a low place. And I remember one of the doctors told my mother to take me home, to love me for the time I had left.
Oh my God.
And so I had to summon, and my mother had to summon, and all of us had to summon the spiritual resources to say yes in the face of a lot of no's, and not knowing what the end of the story would be. And my congregational community, as well as others, were a big part of my healing. And I think that kind of, I've had a number of experiences where I've had to, summon the spiritual resources, not alone, again, with others, to move ahead and say, how can we, swim to the shore and get as far as we can? And maybe we'll get there. And if we can't get there, maybe the next group can continue. So.
Interesting. That was my question around, the origin and the seedbed of your social justice, which I think, people in our, the voters are going to care about that a lot.
Right.
Partly the question that, because it's the question of what will sustain all of us as we move forward. People want to know that their president has the resiliency and that their strength is not just a temporary kind of thing. So thank you for answering that question. My last question is the question that people are always kind of curious about, and that is your experiences with privilege and oppression, race and class. What was it like growing up in New York City? Which for many of our congresses is a place of incredible diversity, but also a place where privilege and oppression are more, clearly defined and perhaps have a greater influence on people's lives as they live them. So just tell me about that kind of stuff, the social location question, as we used to talk about it in theology school. You always do theology from a social location. So
it's very true.
Right.
So in some ways, my social location is I would say middle class by way of upper class and lower class, and that actually really matters and has really informed my understanding and growing up in the city where. It's very evident, the disparity, economic disparity, racial disparity. So my parents, when they got married, not only bridged religious difference of Judaism and Christianity, which was controversial at the time, they also bridged this class difference. Sometimes education can be an indicator. My father grew up in a family where his father was an English professor in college, and my mother grew up in a family where her father was a butcher and had gone to school through the 8th grade. It was certainly a given that my dad would go to college, and my mom won a scholarship to go to college, and my grandfather didn't think women should go to college, and so she was too young to sign for it, and he wouldn't sign for it. So she had to put herself through community college, and then eventually a 4-year college, and then actually got her master's when I was elementary school. She was a nurse, and actually nurses have had to really struggle to become what today is very much much more respected middle class profession. When I was growing up, nurses were still very much undervalued and underpaid, and it was primarily relegated to women, although it was starting to break open. And nurses represented the full diversity of the city. There were people from every culture and every race, and my mother was, I think our parents are often our primary religious educators, and she had a real consciousness around economic justice. And my mother was a union organizer. And actually, because she was married to my father and had an apartment and was a little more distanced from the reach of the hospital because she didn't depend on the hospital for her housing, she used that privilege and talked to me about how she was using that privilege to step out front along with other nurses. And so the union was actually organized at our dining room table. It was organized around our dining room table. And so I was very conscious of the struggle of labor unions and about and I could see around my table which segments of the city were being impacted. And that was a powerful part of growing up. And I think also recognizing the social location of that congregation. And it's on the Upper East Side, and participating in and watching the congregation members break open to new parts of the city and new people in the city who wanted to be Unitarian Universalists, but that we needed to change who we were and how we did things in order to allow them not just to feel welcome, but to truly lead. So my family was very engaged in advocating for the wheelchair ramp and advocating for interweave, and advocating for, Mom was one of the initiators of interweave in the congregation. And later, when I was an assistant minister at All Souls, I really helped support the People of Color Caucus when people of color said that this was something they really wanted to see happen in the congregation.
Interesting. Well, that's, I think we have covered a lot of ground. I want to talk to you again during this campaign.
Okay.
I think I'd love to have a conversation with the candidates about, the issues in the election that are coming up. And there may be a third one on what's really urgent when we get down to closer to the GA. But I feel like I know you a lot better than I did before. And so I'm very grateful for this chance to talk with you. And
thank you.
You want to say closing words, closing arguments, a benediction, perhaps?
Well, I think I would just say this, that for me, the call has always been responding to the call of love. And the way I describe it is participating in the creative healing power of love, and how we can truly break into the suffering and brokenness in our lives and in the world around us. And I have seen Unitarian Universalists and our faith lean into those spaces throughout my life. And so I'm grateful to serve as a minister and to be running for president.
Thank you. Alison Miller, thank you all. See you again.